He was bleeding, exhausted, and completely alone. The gunfire had faded hours ago, but the danger had not. Somewhere beyond the frozen tree line, enemy patrols were moving, slow, methodical, hunting anything that still breathed. This soldier was not supposed to be here. According to the map, this territory had already been lost. According to command, no one was left alive. According to every rule of war, survival was impossible. His unit had advanced under heavy fog at dawn. By nightfall, the fog was gone, and so were the men. Artillery had torn the ground apart, orders were lost, screams were swallowed by explosions, and when the smoke finally cleared, he realized the truth no soldier wants to face. He was behind enemy lines, wounded, unarmed, and completely forgotten. Every step sent pain through his body. Every sound could mean death. A snapped twig, a distant engine, a shadow moving where no shadow should be. If captured, he would not be treated as a prisoner. If discovered, there would be no mercy, no negotiation, no second chances. And yet, he kept moving. For days he would survive on almost nothing. No radio, no backup, no certainty that his own army even knew he was alive. The cold tried to kill him. Infection tried to finish what bullets had started. Fear whispered constantly that it was already over. He should have died in enemy territory, but somehow he didn't. This is not a story of heroism written in medals and parades. This is a story of raw survival, of a man pushed beyond human limits, and of how one soldier refused to disappear into the silence of war. Before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. These are real war stories, told in detail, without exaggeration, and without forgetting the human cost behind every uniform. And let me know in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? It's incredible to see how far these stories travel across the world. Now, let's go back to where this story truly began. The winter of 1944 was unforgiving. Snow covered the forests, roads, and ruined villages of Eastern Europe, turning the battlefield into a frozen maze where survival depended as much on endurance as on strategy. The soldier at the center of this story was an infantryman, not an officer, not a hero written into history books, just one of thousands sent forward with a simple objective: advance, secure the area, and hold the line. The briefing had been rushed. Intelligence suggested the enemy was retreating. Resistance was expected to be light. The mission, on paper, looked manageable. But war has a way of punishing assumptions. At first light, his unit moved through a dense forest. Visibility was poor. Snow muffled footsteps, creating an eerie silence, broken only by the clink of equipment and heavy breathing beneath winter gear. The men were tense, but confident. They believed they were pushing into abandoned ground. They were wrong. Without warning, machine gun fire erupted from elevated positions. Mortars followed seconds later. The forest exploded into chaos. Trees shattered. Snow and dirt rained down. Men dropped instantly, some without ever understanding what hit them. The unit tried to regroup, but communication collapsed. Radios were damaged. Runners never returned. Orders became guesses. Our soldier was thrown to the ground by a nearby explosion. Shrapnel tore into his leg and shoulder. The pain was immediate and blinding. He tried to stand, failed, and crawled behind what little cover he could find. Around him, the battlefield disintegrated. Some men charged forward in desperation. Others retreated blindly into the woods. Screams echoed, then stopped abruptly. The enemy had planned this ambush carefully. They knew the terrain. They had waited. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time lost meaning. Eventually, the gunfire moved farther away. The battle shifted, leaving behind the wounded, the dead, and those no one had time to retrieve. When silence finally settled, the soldier tried to call out. No response. He dragged himself forward, searching for familiar faces. What he found instead were bodies half buried in snow, weapons scattered, blood freezing where it had fallen. That was when the realization hit him. The line had moved on. His unit was gone. Whether they had advanced, retreated, or been wiped out, he had no way of knowing. All he knew was that staying where he was meant certain death. Night was coming, and this land now belonged to the enemy. Wounded, barely able to walk, and deep behind enemy lines, he made a decision that would determine whether he lived or vanished forever. He would move, no matter the cost. Night arrived faster than he expected. The sun disappeared behind the trees, as if someone had extinguished it on purpose, plunging the forest into a cold, oppressive darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and with it came a silence so complete that it felt unnatural. No gunfire, no voices, only the faint sound of wind moving through branches and the distant echo of engines far away, enemy vehicles most likely. He understood immediately what night meant. During the day, there was at least the illusion of control. You could see where you were going. You could spot movement before it reached you. At night, especially in enemy territory, survival became a gamble measured in seconds. He pressed himself against the base of a fallen tree and examined his wounds. His leg was the worst. Shrapnel had torn through muscle, leaving a deep gash that burned constantly. Blood had soaked into his uniform, now stiff and cold. His shoulder throbbed with every movement, and his fingers shook uncontrollably, partly from pain, partly from exhaustion. He had no medical supplies, no morphine, no bandages, not even clean water. Using a torn piece of fabric from his inner lining, he did the only thing he could. He tied the cloth tightly around his leg, pulling until the pain became unbearable, hoping to slow the bleeding. His teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached, but he made no sound. Noise meant death. As darkness settled in, fear crept closer. Every shadow looked like a man. Every sound felt deliberate. He imagined boots crunching snow just beyond his vision, rifles raised, flashlights cutting through the trees. He did not sleep. Instead, he waited. Hours passed in fragments. His thoughts drifted in and out, memories blending with hallucinations. Faces of men from his unit appeared in his mind, some laughing, some screaming, some silent. He wondered who was still alive. He wondered if anyone would come looking for him. Deep down, he already knew the answer. No rescue was coming. Sometime after midnight, he heard it clearly. Voices, not his language. They were close, too close. He lowered himself into the snow, barely breathing. The voices moved slowly, methodically, accompanied by the metallic clink of equipment. An enemy patrol, searching the aftermath of the battle, finishing what the artillery had started. A beam of light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the ground. It paused just a few meters from where he lay. He did not move. His muscles screamed. His leg felt like it was on fire. Snow melted against his skin, soaking his clothes. But he remained perfectly still. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then the light moved on. The voices faded. Only then did he allow himself to breathe again. That moment changed him. From that night on, survival was no longer about reaching friendly lines. It was about staying invisible, about thinking like the enemy, about accepting that one mistake, one cough, one wrong step would end everything. When dawn finally broke, he forced himself to move. Walking was agony. Each step sent sharp pain through his leg, but stopping was not an option. He followed the terrain carefully, avoiding open ground, keeping to low areas and dense cover. He moved slowly, painfully, but with purpose. Hunger set in quickly. By midday, his stomach cramped violently. He had not eaten since before the ambush. His body, already weakened by blood loss, demanded fuel he did not have. He chewed on snow just to keep his mouth wet, knowing it would only make the cold worse. As the hours dragged on, signs of enemy presence became more frequent. Fresh tracks in the snow, spent cigarette butts, the distant sound of engines and shouting. He was moving through occupied territory now, not just behind enemy lines, but deep within them. Late in the afternoon, desperation forced a risky decision. He spotted a small, abandoned farmhouse at the edge of a clearing. The roof was damaged, windows shattered, but it offered something he desperately needed: shelter. He waited. For nearly an hour, he watched from the tree line. No movement, no smoke, no sound. Against his better judgment, he crawled closer. Inside, the air smelled of mold and rot. Furniture lay broken, scattered across the floor. But there, near the back wall, he found something miraculous: a single potato, old, soft, probably forgotten during an evacuation. He ate it raw, hands shaking, barely chewing. It was the best thing he had ever tasted, but relief was short-lived. As he finished eating, a distant engine roared to life. Too close, he froze. Voices followed. Laughter, boots on wood. Someone was entering the farmhouse. He had seconds to react. Injured, unarmed, trapped inside enemy territory, he faced the most dangerous moment yet. This time, hiding might not be enough. The sound of boots on wood echoed through the ruined farmhouse. He pressed himself against the far wall, barely daring to breathe. The room was small, with no real place to hide. Broken furniture offered little cover, and the floor creaked under even the slightest movement. His heart pounded so violently that he feared it could be heard. The voices grew louder. 2 men, maybe 3. They were speaking casually, confidently, the voices of soldiers who believed the war belonged to them. One laughed. Another complained about the cold. The sound of metal clinking against rifles cut through the air like a warning. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, not in prayer but in calculation. If they searched the house thoroughly, he was finished. He had no weapon, no strength to fight, no way to run. His only chance was to become part of the ruin itself, another broken object in a place already destroyed. The door to the room creaked open. A beam of light swept across the floor, illuminating dust, shattered wood, and his blood-stained uniform. It paused dangerously close to his boots. He didn't move. Pain radiated through his leg in waves so intense that black spots danced in his vision. His body begged him to shift, to adjust, to relieve the pressure. He resisted every instinct. One of the soldiers stepped closer. For a brief, terrifying second, he was certain it was over. Then, somewhere outside, a sharp whistle cut through the air. A command. The soldiers reacted instantly. The beam of light snapped away. Boots turned. Voices rose in urgency. They left as quickly as they had arrived. He remained frozen long after the sounds faded, his muscles locked, his lungs burning from shallow breaths. When he finally allowed himself to move, it was barely a twitch, just enough to confirm he was still alive. That was the moment he understood something crucial. Luck had saved him. But luck was running out. He could not stay there. Using the last of his strength, he dragged himself out the back of the farmhouse and into the tree line. Snow soaked his uniform again, but he welcomed the cold. It dulled the pain, if only slightly. As night fell for the second time, the true danger emerged. The wound in his leg was changing. The skin around it had swollen, turning dark and angry. A foul smell clung to the fabric. Infection had begun to take hold. Fever followed soon after, waves of heat followed by uncontrollable shivering. His thoughts became scattered. He found himself talking aloud, whispering names of men who were not there. At times, he was convinced he heard his unit nearby, calling for him. More than once, he nearly answered before stopping himself. That mistake would have been fatal. The fever worsened through the night. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his body no longer fully obeying him. At one point, he woke up convinced he was back home, sitting at a table, warm and safe. The illusion shattered when pain surged through his leg, dragging him back into the frozen forest. By morning he could barely stand. Every step felt heavier than the last. His vision blurred, the world tilted unpredictably. He leaned on trees, on rocks, on anything that could keep him upright. Still he moved. Stopping meant surrender. And surrender here meant death. Late that afternoon, he reached a shallow ravine. It offered concealment from patrols and a break from the wind. He collapsed there, unable to go any farther. That was when the realization struck him with terrifying clarity. He was dying, not from a bullet, not from an explosion, but slowly, quietly, alone, claimed by infection, exhaustion, and exposure. For the first time since the ambush, fear gave way to something else. Acceptance. He lay back against the frozen earth and stared at the grey sky above. He thought of his family, of unfinished conversations, of how easily a life could disappear without a trace. Hours passed. Then, faintly, he heard something different. Not voices, not engines. A sound he hadn't heard since before the ambush. Artillery. Distant, rhythmic, familiar. His heart surged. That sound meant one thing. The front line was not as far away as he believed. Summoning a strength he didn't know he still had, he forced himself upright. Every movement screamed in protest, but hope had returned. Fragile, dangerous, but alive. He adjusted his direction, orienting himself toward the sound, toward the guns, toward the only chance he had left. Behind him lay enemy territory. Ahead of him lay uncertainty. But for the first time since being left for dead, he was no longer wandering blindly. He was moving toward survival. The sound of artillery became his compass. Each distant boom cut through the fog in his mind, giving direction to steps that no longer felt voluntary. His body moved because it had to, not because it wanted to. Pain had become constant, no longer sharp, but heavy, deep, and consuming. The fever was winning. His thoughts came slower now, like words spoken through water. Simple decisions required effort. He forgot where he was for moments at a time, then snapped back into awareness with panic when he realized he was still exposed, still hunted. The ravine ended abruptly. Ahead of him lay open ground. A wide, frozen field stretched out between two lines of trees. No cover, no shelter, just snow, ice, and wind. On the far side, the forest rose again, darker, denser, safer, but the field was a death trap. Tracks were visible in the snow, vehicle marks, foot patrol routes. This was an area the enemy clearly used. Crossing it meant visibility, exposure, risk. He dropped to his knees at the edge of the tree line, breathing hard. If he waited, the infection would finish him. If he crossed, the enemy might. There was no good choice left. He waited only long enough to study the horizon. No movement, no engines, no voices. He stepped out. Every meter felt endless. The snow was deeper than it looked, swallowing his boots, dragging him down. His wounded leg buckled repeatedly, forcing him to catch himself before collapsing completely. Halfway across, he heard it. An engine. Low. Steady. Coming from the right. He froze. A truck emerged from behind a distant ridge, moving slowly along the edge of the field. Soldiers rode in the back, silhouettes against the pale sky. They weren't looking for him. Not yet. But that didn't matter. If they looked in his direction, they would see him immediately. There was nowhere to hide. He dropped flat into the snow, pressing his body down, trying to make himself smaller. The cold bit into his skin instantly. His face burned. His hands went numb. The truck slowed. Laughter drifted across the field. For a terrible moment, he thought it was stopping. Seconds passed. Then the engine revved again. The vehicle continued on, disappearing behind the trees. He remained motionless long after it was gone. When he finally forced himself to move again, his body resisted violently. Muscles cramped. His vision darkened. He nearly passed out standing upright, but somehow he reached the far tree line. He collapsed there, hidden once more. That crossing had taken everything he had left. For a long time, he lay there, barely aware of his surroundings. Snow gathered on his uniform, his breathing slowed, his thoughts drifted towards sleep, a dangerous, final kind of rest. What pulled him back was not fear. It was sound, voices, different from before, urgent, shouted, and unmistakably familiar. His heart jumped. These voices spoke his language, friendly voices. He pushed himself up weakly, straining to listen. The words were fragmented, carried by the wind, but the tone was clear. These were not enemy patrols. This was a search party. He tried to shout. Nothing came out. His throat was dry, raw, useless. Panic surged. He clawed at the snow, forcing air into his lungs, trying again. This time, a hoarse sound escaped him, barely more than a rasp. The voices paused. One of them shouted something back. Hope exploded inside him. Summoning the last reserve of strength his body had stored, he grabbed a piece of metal from his gear and struck it repeatedly against a rock. The sound was weak, irregular, but it was something. The voices grew louder. Figures appeared between the trees. Soldiers, friendly soldiers. They moved cautiously at first, weapons raised, scanning for traps. Then one of them spotted him. The reaction was instant. "Over here!" Hands grabbed him gently, urgently. Someone knelt beside him, swearing under their breath when they saw the wound on his leg. Another soldier wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. He tried to speak, tried to explain, tried to say how long he had been alone. But the words wouldn't form. As they lifted him onto a stretcher, his vision blurred. The sky above spun slowly. Faces leaned over him, concerned, shocked. "You're safe," someone said. For the first time in days, he believed it. As they carried him away from the forest, away from enemy territory, the tension finally released its grip. His body, no longer forced to survive on will alone, began to shut down. Darkness crept in. This time it wasn't dangerous, it was rest. He woke up to light. Not the harsh white glare of the battlefield, but something softer, diffused. For a moment he didn't understand where he was. The smell was different, clean, sharp, antiseptic. Pain followed awareness. It spread through his body like fire waking from sleep. He tried to move and felt restraints, not to hold him prisoner, but to keep him from tearing at his wounds. Panic flared briefly until a calm voice cut through it. "Easy. You're safe." He turned his head slowly. A medic stood beside the bed, exhaustion etched into his face. The room was crowded with equipment, a field hospital, canvas walls, the distant sound of artillery, farther away now. He was back, barely. The medic explained what his fading consciousness struggled to process. His leg had been badly infected. If they had found him even a day later, amputation or death would have been unavoidable. His body temperature had been dangerously high. Blood loss, dehydration, exposure. He had survived on nothing but momentum and refusal. Over the next hours, fragments of truth emerged. He had been missing for 6 days. 6 days behind enemy lines. 6 days wounded, unarmed, and completely alone. But the most shocking revelation came later. A junior officer arrived with paperwork in hand. When he checked the name on the bed, his expression shifted from routine to disbelief. According to official records, this soldier was already listed as killed in action. His unit, shattered in the ambush, had reported heavy casualties. In the chaos of retreat, with bodies left unrecovered and no communication, names were added to the list of the dead. His was one of them. A letter had already been prepared. At that very moment, somewhere far away, his family was either about to be notified or already mourning him. The weight of that realization was heavier than any wound. While he fought to survive in silence, the world had already moved on without him. Recovery was slow. Weeks passed in the hospital. Fever returned more than once. Infection lingered stubbornly. There were moments when doctors spoke in low voices near his bed, uncertain if he could hear them. More than once they questioned whether his leg could be saved, but he endured, just as he had endured the forest. Eventually he was strong enough to sit up, to walk a few steps, to look at his reflection and recognize himself again, thinner, older, marked. When the official correction was filed, it was almost anticlimactic. One line changed in a report, from killed in action to recovered. No ceremony, no headline, just a quiet acknowledgement that death had been wrong. When he finally returned to friendly territory permanently, his war did not end. Like many survivors, he carried the battlefield with him. Nightmares, sudden silences, the instinct to listen for boots in the dark. But he also carried something else. Perspective. He knew how thin the line was between existence and disappearance, how easily a life could be erased by circumstance, paperwork, and silence. Years later, when the war was over and medals were distributed, his story remained mostly untold. No dramatic last stand, no famous photograph, just survival, raw and unglamorous. But sometimes survival is the greatest defiance of all. He should have died in enemy territory. History says he did, but he came back anyway. War is often remembered through numbers. Battles won, territories lost, casualties counted, but numbers never tell stories like this one. This soldier did not change the course of the war. He did not capture a city or raise a flag. There were no cameras waiting for him when he returned. And yet, his survival matters, because behind every uniform is a human being, fragile, afraid, determined. Someone who bleeds, who doubts, who reaches a point where instinct replaces training and will replaces strength. For 6 days, this man existed outside of history. No orders, no support, no certainty that anyone even knew he was alive. On paper, he was already gone. But survival does not always follow paperwork. It happens quietly, in the dark, in moments where no one is watching, in decisions that will never be recorded, but that mean everything to the person making them. Stories like this remind us that war is not only fought with weapons, it is fought inside the body, against pain, hunger, infection, and fear, and inside the mind, where giving up can be just as deadly as the enemy. He should have died in enemy territory. By every logical measure, he was supposed to disappear into the snow, unnamed and unrecovered. But he didn't. And because he didn't, this story exists. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on how many others never had the chance to return. Not because they lacked courage, but because war does not offer fairness. Thank you for staying until the end. And if you want more real war stories told with respect, depth, and honesty, make sure you're subscribed. Because as long as these stories are told, the men behind them are never truly forgotten.